What is peak oil?
I don't find myself explaining it very often anymore because more and more people know about it, but peak oil, we talk about it as generally this huge transition from fossil fuels, which have been dominant in industrial society for 150 years, to something else, and we don't know what. And what happens is oil production or coal production or natural gas production follows a natural bell-shaped curve, and the peak is when you're at the peak of extraction of the resource. And after the peak, you extract less and less of it, which means that growing demand can no longer keep up with diminishing supply. And so this creates a huge imbalance between demand and supply, and you see things like rising prices as we now do for oil and for natural gas. So the peak is really this transition point from when the fossil fuel energy that we've used to build our society, the cheap and abundant fossil fuel energy, starts to become increasingly scarce and expensive.
Is this a problem for some reason?
Well, it's a problem because we won't have increasing amounts of energy to fuel our economy and for it to grow, continue to grow. So peak energy also means peak income, for example. And so it's going to have huge economic implications, things like recession and economic depression hitting people. But it's, in a larger perspective, it's really this fundamental transition from fossil fuels to a more sustainable way of living. And we just won't have enough renewable energy sources to be able to supply the voracious energy consumption that we have. Fossil fuels were a one-time gift, and we're depleting them rapidly. So we're going to have to make do with less, reduce and curtail our consumption, and live more locally, as we won't have the cheap oil to get all of our products from the globalized marketplace.
When you talk about recession, is this something like we had back in the 80s where we had some recessions during the Reagan era or the Bush era? Or?
I think this is going to be an unprecedented economic challenge. The Department of Energy study in 2005 was commissioned. It's called the Hirsch Report, and they studied the peaking of resources, not saying necessarily when, but what the implications were. And one of them is that it would be unprecedented economic recession and depression. And when they use that word unprecedented, they're saying worse than the Depression or World War II. So with that kind of language coming from a government report, and there's other reports, I think that it's a situation to be very concerned about. But on the other side, it's going to be a huge economic transition to, I think, something that's better and something that actually serves communities and people and our health and nature a lot better than our current industrial economic system.
So you're talking about some kind of like an economic depression, like back during the Great Depression of the 20s?
I think it's going to be a transition, and however that meant, it might be certainly a depression at first, or a depression for a long time. There's a lot of factors, but I think eventually we're going to start to take care of each other more on a local level, and to feed each other and to take care of each other, and it's just going to be a different kind of economic system. And we're going to be doing a lot more with a lot less energy. For example, with transportation, we're not going to be traveling as much or as fast. And for agriculture, we're going to be using a lot more human labor, going away from the fossil fuel-based machinery and petrochemicals. And so those are just some of the areas where the transition will take place, and it may or may not play out as a depression, but it's just a different kind of economic system that's arising.
How long have you known about this problem, peak oil?
I've been studying it for about 5 years now, and there's a lot of evidence pointing to a peak in the imminent few years, or perhaps a few years ago. So I think we're right at that peak moment where the next decade we're really going to see a dramatic fall off in the availability of energy resources and all of the dramatic implications associated with that.
And what brought you to this topic? Was it something you were learning at school, or?
I originally found it through looking at population overshoot and just general resource depletion of water and water scarcity and loss of arable land, those kinds of things, and really found that fossil fuels is fundamental to everything that we do in our society, to how everything runs. and that the depletion of fossil fuels specifically is going to cause the most hardship and cause this great transition, and ultimately, I think, help create a better, much more sustainable world. So it's a frightening possibility, and I certainly experienced a lot of that when coming to peak oil, and one does when coming to climate change as well. But I think that we've begun to see that in many ways the current industrial system doesn't serve our ultimate needs, which are for a fulfilling life, a healthy relationships, a healthy environment, and a healthy world to give to our children. And it's exciting to be a part of a movement that's looking at what can.
You were married recently, and a lot of times after marriage, children come along, and is that providing some of the incentive for you to be interested in this topic? Or?
I think for many people, they start, when thinking about having children, they start looking at, well, what kind of community are they going to have to live in, and what kind of environment, and what kind of future am I bringing this child into? And that certainly can frighten a lot of people, because we face a very uncertain future, and we really can't predict what the life will be like for them. But it also, I think, calls on a deeper part of us that really is called to serve future generations, and that drive to have children and to pass on the best of this culture onto them, I think, is a very powerful thing, and I think that we can tap that energy whether you have children or not. Mm-hmm.